What would we do without the Supreme Court? Well, we do need a Supreme Court the way our system is currently organized. The only thing I'm saying right now is that the myth of an apolitical Supreme Court is just that, a myth. And the guise of them being apolitical has allowed them to do some really wacky shit. The Supreme Court just said that evidence of innocence is not enough. So to anyone who pretends that the Supreme Court is a non-political organization that does nothing but, you know, impartially analyze the law, yeah, hold on. Last December, the Supreme Court gathered to hear oral arguments in Shin versus Ramirez, a case that could mean life or death for Barry Jones, who sits on death row in Arizona for the murder of his girlfriend's 4-year-old daughter, Rachel. Gotta say, the murder of a 4-year-old is one of those things that'll get you the death penalty. In 2018, a federal court overturned Jones's conviction, concluding he had failed to receive effective counsel, a violation of his Sixth Amendment rights. Had that happened, a federal judge ruled, there is a reasonable probability that his jury would not have convicted him of any of the crimes with which he was charged and previously convicted. After losing in the Ninth U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals, Arizona's Attorney General appealed the decision to the Supreme Court. During those oral arguments, state prosecutors repeatedly argued that innocence isn't enough of a reason to throw out Jones's conviction. On Monday morning, by a 6-3 vote, oh, what an interesting split there. The Supreme Court concurred Barry Jones' innocence is not enough to keep him off death row. The state of Arizona can kill Jones even if there exists a preponderance of evidence that he committed no crime. The crime for which Jones was convicted is horrific. The little girl, Rachel, died from peritonitis, the result of a rupture in her small intestine. Jesus, that's f***ing grim. But Jones's lawyers never questioned the physical evidence that led to his conviction, as Liliana Segura, an investigative reporter for The Intercept, pointed out in an exhaustive piece last year. Had Jones's lawyers been up to the task, there was plenty that could have been done to defend their client. They could have pointed out that the lead detective who examined Rachel at the hospital didn't bother to investigate how or when the child sustained her fatal injury, or consider a single other suspect aside from Jones. Really? They could have called a medical expert to show there was no real evidence the child had been... They didn't call a medical expert on the... They didn't determine time of death, identify any other suspects, or get a confirmation from a medical expert of the nature of the death. Most crucially, Jones's lawyers could have called a pathologist to challenge the state's theory of the crime, which rested on a narrow time frame during which Jones had supposedly assaulted Rachel the day before her death. Medical experts now say Rachel's abdominal injury could not have become fatal so quickly. At the time of his trial, Jones was appointed a lawyer by the state, a fundamental constitutional right guaranteed to all criminal defendants under the Sixth Amendment. By the way, this wasn't the case until, what, 56? When was the Supreme Court ruling where they decided, like, oh yeah, people not having lawyers basically means they should be guaranteed a lawyer, because otherwise it's not really due process. When was that? What year was that? There was a whole movie about it. Come on, guys. I thought that was always a thing? No. It used to be if you couldn't afford a lawyer, you got to go out there and learn the law yourself, buddy. 63, I think. Yeah, it's something around there, 50s, 60s. There was a guy, Gideon versus Wainwright. There's a great movie about it. Basically, a guy who committed a crime, got convicted of a crime, went to jail, but he didn't have the money for a lawyer. So while in jail for the crime he did commit, he was like, hey, it's kind of wacky. Gideon's trumpet, yeah. Kind of wacky that, you know, if you can't afford a lawyer, there's basically 0% chance that you can, like, effectively navigate the legal system to argue your innocence. And it went up to the Supreme Court, and now people are guaranteed a public defender. But that wasn't until 63. If a defendant argues after conviction they failed to receive adequate counsel, they are appointed a new legal representation. If the new lawyer also provides ineffective counsel, a federal habeas appeal allows them to argue that their post-conviction lawyer was ineffective. In effect, Jones argued he received ineffective counsel not once but twice, and the fault lies not with him, but rather his lawyers who were appointed by the state of Arizona. By allowing him to introduce evidence of his innocence, a federal court would be, in effect, rectifying the mistakes made not just by his lawyers, but by the state responsible for appointing them. In a 2012 case, Martinez versus Ryan, the Supreme Court ruled that a convicted defendant, quote, is not at fault for any failure to bring a trial ineffectiveness claim in state court, end quote, thus opened the door to appeals like the one brought about by Jones. Hey guys, remember back when the Supreme Court would have good decisions? Remember when the Supreme Court would do and say things that made sense? It happens sometimes. That's nice. We have this at least. This is good. This means that a defendant is not... Yeah, well, they just reread the quote here. On Monday, the court gutted the precedent established by Martinez. In its decision written by Justice Clarence Thomas, that's right, the Supreme Court justice who failed to recuse himself after the court was voting on whether or not to make public evidence that his wife had participated in an attempted coup in the U.S. government, the gigantic evidence of court corruption that nothing happened. Nothing happens when the evidence comes out. Nothing ever happens when it's shown that they hate this country. The court ruled that a federal court may not conduct an evidentiary hearing or otherwise consider evidence beyond the state court record based on the ineffective assistance of state post-conviction counsel. In short, a convicted defendant like Jones could be held responsible and kept in prison if his state-appointed lawyer provided ineffective counsel for his appeal. It creates a truly bizarre, even Orwellian situation. Ah, there you go, chat. How can a defendant argue ineffective counsel if they can't point to specific examples of that ineffective counsel? And how else can they do that other than by introducing new evidence not presented at trial, which would have likely acquitted them? Thomas is saying, in effect, that a petitioner has to rely on the record of a trial in which they were ineffectively defended, and their actual innocence is of secondary importance. This is actually a fairly recurring pattern in Supreme Court decisions. The Supreme Court will agree theoretically that innocent people should go free, but in practice, what they actually care about is not overburdening the court system. You can find lots of examples of Supreme Court rulings that hamper your ability to get a fair ruling, but the reason they're doing it is because they don't want to step on the toes of the existing justice system and the systems that they've set up. And they don't want to elongate or prolong any set of trials because the system is overburdened as it is. So this decision makes no sense at all unless you're really just trying to get people through to prison as quickly as you can. In this man's case, the death chamber, because he's on death row. Thomas justifies the court's decision by arguing that a federal review imposes significant... Yep! Oh my god! Oh my god! How do I do this every time? Thomas justifies the court decision by arguing a federal review imposes significant costs on a state criminal justice system that include potentially overriding the state's sovereign power to enforce social norms through criminal law. How do I do this every fucking time? Jesus Christ. Pre-read. Pre-watched. I was there at the Supreme Court. Jesus Christ. Sorry, guys. Due process is just too expensive. One might argue that housing a man who committed no actual... The funny thing is, the cost of housing him, keeping on death row, and executing him will be far, far, far greater monetarily than just, allowing the new evidence to be introduced and allowing the conviction to be overturned. It's not about... It's not really about money. It's about keeping the inconvenient innocent from too significantly delaying the threshing machine that is our criminal justice system. As Justice Sotomayor noted in her dissent, the court's decision will leave many people who are convicted in violation of the Sixth Amendment to face incarceration or even execution without any meaningful chance to vindicate their right to counsel. By the way, guys, just so you know, what this means is that if a district has a bunch of really ineffective, or one might say maliciously ineffective, public defenders, then the poor and those not able to afford a lawyer in that district would be f***ed because they would receive ineffective counsel, and their ability to introduce new evidence after the conviction from that ineffective counsel and the trial has been denied. Hypothetically, if we lived in a system where district attorneys tend to work very closely with public defenders, hypothetically, if that was a thing that happened, it wouldn't really be that difficult, because what this does effectively is this rules out additional possibilities for external checks. You know what I mean? It further contains you. It means okay, well, you're subject entirely to the incompetence of the system that you're in right now, and you can't defer to the better judgment of higher courts by introducing new evidence, potentially exonerating yourself. Yeah, exactly. It's about keeping the appearance of finality within the criminal justice system. The last thing that people in the criminal justice system want is to give people the impression that the ruling of a court is anything other than a God-given, finality. Because every time a bad ruling is overturned, every time additional evidence is submitted to challenge a previous like conviction, every time this happens, it contributes to the impression we all have of the truth. The impression we have that this system sucks. SCOTUS's decision will allow for innocent man to potentially be killed by the state for largely procedural reasons. That Arizona even appealed the federal court's decision in this case is truly depraved. Yeah, the fact that the state of Arizona, which hates you and wants you to die, by the way, would appeal this, essentially go like, hey, Supreme Court, we think it's really fucked up that, like, a potentially innocent person could introduce exonerating evidence after the conclusion of a trial in which they had incompetent counsel. The state could have sought a new trial to release Jones. Instead, state prosecutors took their appeal to the Supreme Court, where if they won, it risked putting a man to death when substantial doubt exists about his guilt. What social objective is furthered by such an outcome? Why would any prosecutor risk killing an innocent man? It still blows my mind that they got a guilty verdict on this guy when no medical examination had been done of the corpse. How on earth did they arrive at the conclusion that Jones had raped that girl when no medical examination was done? Like, how, like, a girl dies with, like, intestinal trauma and just, like, that's it? Like, that's it? Like, that's all it took? Racism? Well, is it racism? Is there Barry Jones? He's probably black, right? I mean, the guy was white with Barry Jones, spiritually black. Racist against the name. Still horrible. He's poor. Well, he's certainly poor if he's getting public counsel. You never, ever, ever want to be defended by a public defender. Not, by the way, because public defenders are all bad. They're not. But because public defenders are overworked. You want to buy a lawyer or hire a lawyer. Do we know what evidence they presented against him? If the evidence against him did not include a medical examination of the body of the young girl, then it's I have no idea what evidence they're presenting. You know, there would have to be some pretty wild evidence that isn't that in order to, like, you know, bring about this. This shit happened in 1995. He's been sitting on death row for almost 30 years. Did I miss how long ago this crime took place? Oh yeah, people sit on death row for ages and ages. Yeah, 1995. This is the Vaush article. In 1995, Barry Jones was convicted of murdering Rachel Gray, his girlfriend's 4-year-old daughter. This guy spent 30 years, almost, on death row for a crime he didn't do because he received ineffective counsel, and his attempt to introduce exonerating evidence after ineffective counsel was challenged by the state prosecutors, who then took it up to the Supreme Court. And now, after 30 years, he gets to see the highest court in the land say, your innocence is irrelevant. You're going to die. You're going to hang. Why so much time on death row? Dude, people stay on death row for ages. Average death row wait time? That's kind of a grim. In 2020, an average of 227 months. That's nearly 20 years. That's the average, nearly 20 years, elapsed between sentencing and execution for inmates on death row in the United States. There is no death row if you're like 70 or older, because you'll probably die of old age before that. Yeah, it's to give time for appeals, which has just been shot down. Gray died of a laceration or small intestine, an extremely painful injury that slowly floods the victim with poisonous fluids. The prosecution's theory is Jones must have inflicted this injury on Gray during a 4-hour period when he was taking care of her. Gray died about 12 hours later. This theory does not make sense medically. Gray's injury would have killed her slowly and should not have proven fatal in only 12 hours. In a comprehensive article reviewing the evidence against Jones, The Intercept's Liliana Segura quotes 3 physicians who say the prosecution's theory is wrong. Yeah, they literally just didn't have. There are other suspects. Gray's mother, Angela, was eventually convicted of child abuse. Wait, the mother was convicted of child abuse and she wasn't a suspect? There's evidence Gray's brother sexually preyed on young girls. On top of that, Gray reportedly said shortly before her death a boy hit her in the stomach with a metal bar. This is like a comedy. This guy gets arrested, charged with the rape and murder of a 4-year-old girl, and then the cops are just like, yeah, we think it's this guy. No, we don't have any evidence, whatever. And then 30 years later, the courts are like, they said, should have had a competent public defender appointed to you 30 years ago, idiot. Should have tried harder. Maybe don't be poor. Maybe be able to afford your own lawyer. That idiot. Moron. Sounds like a skill issue, to be honest. And meanwhile, like, there are people all around that are more like credible suspects. All they have on him is a 4-hour window during which they were alone together, and there was no medical examination. Yeah, this is like playing the whodunit game, and like there are 8 characters. Like you've got like the butler, and you've got like the girl in the red dress, and you pick like the pizza delivery guy who was only there for 2 seconds in Act 3. And you Clue, that's right. And then they killed the victim with a gun, but they never had a gun. And the prosecution's like, yeah, it was them and they had a gun somehow. Who's speedrun? His picture's down lower. Harry Jones. Jesus. Yeah, I guess he looks about how I would look if I had just been... After what he's gone through, I think he's earned this, this expression. How was he convicted without medical evidence? That's not a procedural one, that's an evidentiary one. Well, we have 2 issues. The evidentiary issue was the incompetent counsel that he received. And the procedural issue is that the Supreme Court is shooting down his ability to present evidence after the fact to exonerate him. So he had multiple evidentiary issues because of his public defender, and then there are now procedural issues the Supreme Court is entrenching into constitutional precedent. And he's going to die for this? No, don't worry. Only 30 years more on death row, and maybe he'll die of old age. Would you be in favor of abolishing the death penalty? Yeah, of course. Why is the Supreme Court bad at everything? It's not bad at everything. The Supreme Court is just full of... the Supreme Court is just a political organization that people pretend is apolitical. And because people pretend they're apolitical, they basically get treated like spiritual leaders who don't do politics when all they do is politics. They're like 9 like head priests who sit up there, and whenever they like arbitrarily like, you know, they read their books and they like wave their staff, you know, and they come out with like some fucking opinion, and people are like, "Oh, well that's just the way it is," you know? Well, it's like, no, they decided on that, you know? They chose to say that. What would we do without the Supreme Court? Well, we do need a Supreme Court the way our system is currently organized. I don't have solutions right now. The only thing I'm saying right now is that the myth of an apolitical Supreme Court is just that, a myth. And the guise of them being apolitical has allowed them to do some really wacky shit. I'm not American. Does Biden have the power to pardon him? If I'm not mistaken, the president has the power to pardon anyone. Yeah, for any reason. I don't think there's any... Is there any limit at all to the presidential pardon? Oh, for a federal crime. Federal, that's right. Federal crime. This is a state crime. This is a state crime. He couldn't. Governors do it for state crimes. So the governor of Arizona... Governor Arizona. Is this guy a cuck? I have a feeling. Doug Ducey. Republican Party. And he looks like this. Yeah, this guy's going to show up with a popcorn bucket for the execution. Political phrenology is real, Vaush? Oh, true. The only thing you can learn about skull shapes is whether or not a person's politics are good. Do you have any hopium to balance anything out? I'm terribly sorry, folks. I am often, I think, able to effectively act as both political commentator and therapist, but today that is not a double act that I'm interested in juggling.